In the shadowy depths of true crime, few names evoke the same sense of horror and revulsion as Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. His crimes were so grotesque, so unimaginable, that they defied the limits of human comprehension. Behind his unassuming exterior lay a predator whose desires extended beyond mere murder. Dahmer sought to dominate, to possess, and to make his victims permanent in ways that shocked the world. His story is one of neglect, compulsion, and missed opportunities, a case that forced society to confront its darkest nightmares and its failures in justice. Join us as we delve into the chilling story of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of America's most infamous serial killers, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. Born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Dahmer's childhood was marked by early warning signs that something was deeply wrong. As a boy, he was withdrawn and isolated, struggling to connect with others. But more disturbingly, he developed an intense fascination with death and decay. He began collecting animal carcasses, dissecting them, bleaching bones, and observing the decomposition process with a morbid curiosity. To many, it was an odd but seemingly harmless interest, yet it foreshadowed the horrors he would later commit. Dahmer's home life was unstable and deeply fractured. His parents' marriage was riddled with arguments, emotional distance, and neglect. As his family disintegrated, Dahmer spiraled into alcoholism, drinking heavily by his teenage years to numb the growing urges he could not control. He fantasized about violence, necrophilia, and total domination over another human being. Yet, despite these thoughts, he was still seen as a relatively unremarkable young man, awkward, but not outwardly threatening. No one knew what was lurking beneath the surface. In 1978, just after graduating high school, Dahmer committed his first murder. He picked up Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old hitchhiker, under the pretense of drinking and conversation. But when Hicks attempted to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, strangled him, and later dismembered and scattered his remains. It was a crime born from a fear of abandonment, a desperate need to keep his victim from leaving. This theme would define his killings, an obsession with control, possession, and the erasure of individuality. For nearly a decade, Dahmer lived a relatively quiet existence, though his urges never faded. He attempted college but dropped out due to his drinking problems. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, serving in Germany, but was discharged in 1981 due to his worsening alcoholism. Directionless, he returned to Ohio, then later Milwaukee, living with his grandmother, who remained unaware of the darkness festering inside him. It was here that he resumed killing, unable to suppress his depraved desires any longer. Between 1987 and 1991, Dahmer embarked on a horrific killing spree, claiming the lives of 17 young men. His victims were often lured to his apartment with promises of money, alcohol, or companionship. Once inside, they met their fate through drugging, strangulation, and dismemberment. But for Dahmer, murder alone wasn't enough. He kept trophies, skulls, bones, and even entire body parts, preserving them as a way to maintain control over his victims even in death. He even engaged in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism, consuming parts of his victims in a chilling display of dominance. His apartment in Milwaukee's Oxford Apartments became a nightmarish house of horrors. When authorities finally entered, they uncovered severed heads in the refrigerator, human hearts and skeletons, vats of acid, and photographs documenting the dismemberment of his victims. The stench of decomposing flesh had long filled the air, yet somehow Dahmer had managed to evade suspicion. Time and again, law enforcement had opportunities to stop him, but failed. Perhaps the most infamous failure came in 1991, when Konorak Sintha Somphone, a 14-year-old boy, managed to escape Dahmer's clutches. Drugged, naked, and bleeding, he stumbled into the street where neighbors frantically called police. But when officers arrived, Dahmer, ever the manipulator, convinced them that Konorak was his intoxicated lover. Ignoring the pleas of bystanders, police returned the boy to Dahmer's apartment. Within hours, Konorak was dead, subjected to the same fate as those before him. It was an appalling failure, a moment that, had it played out differently, could have saved multiple lives. Dahmer's killing spree came to a sudden halt on July 22, 1991, when Tracy Edwards, another intended victim, escaped and flagged down authorities. What police found inside Dahmer's apartment was beyond comprehension. Photographs of mutilated corpses, human remains in every corner, and the remnants of his sickening experiments. It was the discovery of a nightmare made real. Jeffrey Dahmer had finally been caught. During his confession, Dahmer spoke with disturbing calmness and clarity, detailing his crimes with an eerie lack of emotion. He admitted to necrophilia, cannibalism, and an uncontrollable urge to dominate and consume his victims. He expressed remorse, but not for the reasons one might expect. He did not grieve for his victims, but rather for his inability to stop himself. At trial, he pleaded guilty but insane, but the jury rejected his insanity defense. He was sentenced to 16 life terms, amounting to 957 years in prison. Though he would spend his remaining days behind bars, fate had one final chapter to write. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer met a violent end. While serving time at Columbia Correctional Institution, he was attacked by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, who beat him to death with a metal bar. Many saw it as a form of justice, a brutal conclusion to a life of unspeakable horror. Decades later, the name Jeffrey Dahmer remains synonymous with terror. His crimes exposed deep flaws in the justice system, the failures of law enforcement, and the horrifying reality of unchecked evil. But beyond the sensational headlines and morbid fascination, there were 17 young men, sons, brothers, and friends whose lives were stolen, whose voices were silenced. Their stories, not just Dahmer's, deserve to be remembered. Jeffrey Dahmer was not just a serial killer. He was a nightmare in human form, a man whose depths of depravity still haunt the world. His case remains one of the most chilling examples of how true evil can exist behind the most unassuming facade, hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution.